Denise Dorrance, welcome to Shop Talk. I'm very happy to be recording this interview with you at your own home in Highgate in North London, which has been your home for how long?
Hello, Elena. It's very nice to be here. We've lived here more than 25 years.
So ever since you came to London?
No, I've been in London 32 years. Longer than I lived in the States, actually.
I'm going to share a fun fact with you.
Okay.
You came to London in 1993.
Yes.
So did I.
Wow, where did you come from?
So at the time, I came from Westchester, New York, but that had only been my home for 4 years, or maybe 5, I'm not sure. But so yeah, I know exactly what London was like in 1993.
Amazing.
But what was it like for you?
Well, very different from New York, which is where I came from. When I arrived, shops weren't open on Sunday, I remember. And you couldn't really get a meal or a drink, after 9 or 10 p.m., I would say. So I arrived, I was much younger, and I'd been in New York where you could, have anything you wanted 24 hours a day. So when I arrived here, it was it was a shock to realize that. But on the flip side, I loved all the green, the greenness of it, the kind of villages that made up London. And I was ready to leave New York, so
you're kind of living in the heart of one of those villages. Your window opens or shows green, and we hear birdsong. I hope we can hear that birdsong in the recording. So you love that.
Yeah, this is an oasis for me. I work here as well, but just being able to look out and see everything happening out there, the trees which change throughout the year, and there's the lovely distant voices of children and families. It's like being in the country, but there's a city just outside the wall there.
Do you like your neighbors?
Wow, what a question. Oh, interesting. Should I dish the dirt? No, I do. I love my neighbors. No, it's an interesting group because it's a large block of flats, and we are a community. But funny enough, people stay very private, I think. It's maybe it's an English thing, I want to say, that people they're a bit shy, whereas in America, hi, how are you? Let's be friends right away. I find here they're a bit, it's a cliche, but they're a bit more reserved.
And so who was Denise Dorrance in New York before she came here?
A very loud, funny person, which I had to tone down when I moved here, I realized. Seriously.
Turn it up, please, for this interview.
Yeah, feel free. I'll dig around somewhere for the old Denise. I think, I came to New York when I was ready for a career and very ambitious, and New York delivered that big time. And it's open. I think it's different now, but it was very open to someone coming with... I was from Iowa. I had very little experience of big cities and the competition that was waiting me. But I was fearless. And, I had lots of really good luck with jobs and places I lived. And so New York was ideal for me.
What sort of career?
I was a photo editor, basically. That was the most of my career. I worked at Magnum Photos, and I worked on magazines. And I was always the kind of agent or support to the artist rather than being my own artist. My intention coming to New York was to be an artist, a graphic designer or illustrator. And my first job I became the support system, and that followed me through my whole New York years. So it wasn't until I came here that I started emerging as my own creative person.
Immediately, as soon as you came here, or did that take time?
No, it took a while. It took a while. I brought with me, the skills of being an agent, So I did that for a bit here. And then things changed dramatically when I had my son.
Mm. So I noticed that in your book, your graphic novel, Polar Vortex, which is published in the UK by New River Publishers, but has also been published in America
by The Experiment.
Was it published before the
No,
UK?
about the same time.
About the same
actually.
time.
Yeah.
So the reviews and the responses you're getting from the States and here are kind of simultaneous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is just happening for you.
This is literally just happening.
And how do you feel about having written such a personal story and having people reacting to it on a level which clearly shows that they've absorbed your personal story, that you've exposed it to the world?
Yeah, that's an interesting word, exposed. Because one does feel that. But then, I mean, while I was writing it and drawing it, I felt quite isolated. It was very emotional. I was going into this very deeply felt story about me and my mother and my family, and not really knowing where it would end up in terms of being published or, seeing the light of day. But as I was working on it, and I would go out socially and talk about what I was working on, every place I went, everyone I met, and I'm not kidding, had this story in their life, either to them or they knew someone. So I realized pretty quickly that I was going to tell a story that was very relatable.
But for yourself, it was a story that happened how long ago?
That was about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And when did you actually realize, as it was happening, that you were going to do a book about it, or that you needed to write a book about it?
Yeah, so when I went out to be with my mother, when the whole story starts, in real life I did go out to be with my mom. And while I was with her for those 6-7 weeks, I kept a diary. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. I think I was bored, and because hours are very long in a nursing home, in a care center. So I think the idea was there, maybe in that moments when I was sort of starting this diary, and then I used that as reference for when I finally did work on the book. And I think, and then my mother died. And
while you were still there?
No.
Later?
A year and a half later.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID hit. And I had time to pick up the story and work on it and decide, okay, I've got no other work. I'll see if I can make a graphic novel, which I'd always wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But, yeah.
So to explain, the book really begins with you say you call your mother every day, and one day she's not picking up, so you get worried, and this is the opening scene, more or less, of this story of this novel. How did it actually happen? Was that what literally?
That is literally what happened.
What happened.
Literally.
So I've been through those situations. Almost everything you describe in this book, in a slightly different context, happened to me. So with my mother, and the illness, the long distance presence.
Where was she?
She was in Germany. Mm-hmm. She didn't have dementia. She had another illness, and the need to constantly be there to look after her, to try and figure out how to reconcile that life with this life, and to also observe my mother as a person suddenly being someone quite different from how I had seen her previously, but at the same time not. All of this was incredibly familiar to me. The pain of it, but also the joy of it, oddly. Being also the sibling situation, very much so.
Oh my goodness!
I mean, honestly,
wow, I'm
this
so
book.
Sorry.
So when you said that this book is familiar to many people in terms of the story that you tell, it indeed is. Nevertheless, you're an artist, you're a writer, and the way you put it together, the way you presented it, the way you kind of burnished that inner story out of all of that, is just amazing and very funny, which I am very grateful for, because we need to laugh in those situations. I read somewhere, this leads me to a question which is probably a little bit random, but I read somewhere in another interview that you mentioned you have trouble depicting or drawing men. You prefer to draw women.
Yes.
And there is a man in this book who never looks up from his phone.
Or the insurance
man.
The
insurance man.
Yeah.
Did he happen? Would he recognize himself?
He's representing what I felt was the nasty insurance company. We didn't actually have a visitation of a man who looked like that, but the idea, I thought I could illustrate it very well in this almost faceless person who doesn't really notice you, but has the keys to everything that's going to change your life in a way, if you know what I mean. So I thought it's funny in those, I think as you read, I kind of deal with those dark, painful moments. Not always, but there's a levity, there's some sort of humor that I try and bring in, because I think those shadings are very important, because it can be such a dark, consistently dark place. And it's just my nature to find the humor in dark things anyway.
No, definitely. Yeah. Including death. I mean, one of the main characters in your book is the Grim Reaper, a dark, very black lady who smokes.
Interesting you see it as a woman. That's interesting. Right.
Because the figure... well, didn't you say that you don't draw men? So, but that figure seemed very female to me, and that hand with the cigarette was a little bit Mimi-like. Mimi is a character from your cartoons about a very stylish mother, a fashionista who's always smoking. Yes, bit of a rebel. Yes. So this death character, who initially you only see her hand, I think, and then she keeps. Can I say she? Is that okay?
Of course, it's how you see it. Absolutely.
Perception. So she keeps reappearing, and you keep arguing with her right from the beginning. Go away! My mother is not dying. You have nothing to do here. This is not your business. But she keeps coming back. Yes. So she's a character in the book. Yep. Was she a character on your mind the whole time? Was death on your mind the whole time? I
think it's a very double-edged sword, because you know, for a person who's 90 plus, you know death is coming. They know it's coming, but I was very much in denial. So it was really a very conflicting emotion for me. I was desperate to do what I could to help her to live. Like keeping her at home, allowing her to stay at home, facilitating that. And even in the care center, when I was with her for those 6-7 weeks, I just never really thought, she's going to die here, this is the end. But then I sort of knew, that was possible. It's very complicated. But I did like the character of death very much. In drawing, I think of it as a man, funny enough. But I like a woman. Maybe it's gender fluid. Let's just go gender
fluid death. Let's have that. Maybe it was the robe and the kind of...
it's quite... You're right. It's quite feminine, the way I draw, anyway.
Anyway, the themes in your book are numerous, and all of them very relatable and omnipresent. Grief and how we deal with that, parents, siblings, family, memory. And I think all of that is sort of pulled together into the topic of dementia. What would you say actually happened to your mother under that influence of that illness? Because you, as you show it, she has moments of knowing exactly who she is and where she is and what she wants to do. And then she has moments of having absolutely no idea, and one conversation is quickly forgotten, replaced by another, quickly forgotten. How did dementia, to me, dementia was another character in your book, just like death. How did you begin to learn about it? How did it affect you?
It was very slow. I think dementia creeps up, and you have to be quite vigilant, because it can just look like aging. And, I mean, I even think, oh my goodness, am I getting, because I forget things, and
you actually say that in the book at one point.
Yeah.
Do I have dementia because you can't remember something?
Yeah, of course. And I think it was sort of masked also because my mother looked after my father, who was quite ill in his last years. And then it wasn't until he died in 2013 that it started to become more visible, her dementia. She wasn't diagnosed yet, but the sort of certain basic things she was failing at, and because we spoke every day, I could kind of monitor how she was doing, but because she was so far away, I couldn't really see anything. So in a conversation that's only an hour, I wasn't getting a lot of real facts about her demise. And it wasn't until we took her to the doctor and had a kind of assessment, which I have in the book as well, which is a bit of a joke. And I think, as I say, it was then diagnosed as vascular dementia, okay, but I still wanted to keep her in a place where she could function as best as she could, even with the limitations of dementia. So that meant keeping her at home as long as possible, because it's very disruptive when you move someone with dementia, extremely disruptive. So I think, my sister and I knew my mom had this diagnosis, but we still tried to keep it as normal as possible. And I wouldn't point out to her, Mom, you just said that, or, she'd go round and round and round with certain questions and things, and I just would go with the flow. So. And
in terms of your mother's character, who she was to you, finding yourself alone in the house over this period of time and finding things from the past, like letters and photographs and things you hadn't seen before or known about. Sorry, I'm quoting all of this as if it were fact, but maybe some of it is fiction, but I hope it's okay to refer to what's in the book as something that you did. So as you were going through all of this, you didn't only think about your mother's earlier life as a younger woman, as a mother, as a fiancée, and so on, but also about yourself growing up in that house. So this situation has made you go back from London after I don't know how many years of living here, having a completely new life, having your own family, and here you're going to the house where you were born. Well, I don't know if you were born there, but where you grew up, alone, in the middle of this horrendous ice-cold winter. Yeah. That's why it's called polar vortex, because that was the condition, the weather condition outside. Yeah. So I'm very intrigued by that moment of, it's almost like you being sucked into a time warp. And you enter that house. Your mother is in hospital at that moment. You enter it in a funny way, because the door lock is not working. You have to sort of get in through a window, and suddenly you kind of fall into this house, into the basement of it, actually. And now, to me, that was the most powerful key moment, because again, I've been through that, not literally, but that, finding yourself in a house where you grew up on your own.
Yeah.
And from my experience, that house, now that it's empty of all the people, some still alive, some dead, but not there, and you're alone there, suddenly this house, which has decades of history in it, suddenly just looks like a theater set. and all easily removable. And then who am I?
Exactly.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah, gosh, you've just given me like goosebumps. That was such a good description of the. I mean, I think it's the falling into the basement. I realized was very Freudian, because this kind of unconscious when you're dreaming, often the kind of basement or the dark recesses are seen as the unconscious. So I liked that sort of me going down deep into the story. It was, and it did all actually happen. I did honestly stay in my family home alone, and I think the process of being in the house and being not forced, but I did choose to start to dig around in boxes of photographs and letters and things that were there. Also knowing that I had to go through things because things were going to would have to go or be saved or whatever. And it was very intense. And I remember the last day I was there, I sat in the house. It was completely silent. The snow was coming down outside. I was waiting for my friend to pick me up to take me to the airport. And I sat in the house and I was I just couldn't stay. It was so intense. I knew it was the last time I was going to be in the house. And I called my friend and I said, "You have to come and get me now. I cannot stay here anymore." It was like a tomb. It had just become very cold and very empty, and all the memories had kind of drifted away, and I had to get out, actually.
On a slightly sort of lighter side, or I don't know how else to put it, what was the most surprising thing that you discovered about your mother from these documents of her past that you found in the house that you hadn't seen before?
Well, there was it's in the book, actually. There was a letter I found that my father had written to my mother when they were courting in their early, romantic times. And it was just nothing I'd ever imagined my father could write. Their kind of young love, and it evoked such a beautiful moment in their, meeting and their love, because their marriage was, I never saw it as something super happy. They argued a lot, and my dad was difficult, and blah, blah, blah. So it was a real surprise, and it was lovely to find that.
The wording of it was very tender, and you were surprised by that.
Yeah,
that was
definitely.
So, would you say you're a parent yourself, or would you say that children can really know their parents? Because my
do they want to?
My conclusion after all of that was we know nothing about them.
I think it's the clock resets when we're born, or maybe even later, when you become more aware of them as people. But I'm not sure you ever see them as something other than your parent. I mean, it does flip. For example, for me, when my mom became more and more disabled with dementia, I mean, she literally was turning into a baby, and I became the parent for her, the kind of making decisions for her, and even at some point feeding her, things like that.
Yes, I had the same, and my mother even said, you looked after me last night when I was unwell, and I felt for a minute that it was my mother looking after me, and that's literally how it felt to her, and it's how it felt to me. What I realized during that process, and I think you found that in the letters as well, is how much death our parents have dealt with in their lives without burdening us with those feelings that they had. So, my parents' passing away, some under very difficult conditions. But what my parents never had to do was this kind of going to the place where the parent had lived and sometimes died, and dealing with the aftermath of that. They never had to do that because their parents died under completely different circumstances and much more tragic, actually. But in a way, they were spared this, because this aftermath is extremely difficult to deal with. You mentioned Freudian, and of course, I have to say it's hilarious that you bring Dr. Ruth as a character into this book. I've actually interviewed her and met her. She's absolutely hilarious. But she would have, in that conversation, I was surprised she didn't say anything at all about sex. She would have.
Right. You're right. She was like a sex therapist, wasn't she?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah. I wouldn't know how to wedge that in. Dementia.
She would have known.
That would have been a stretch. More sex makes you happy.
Maybe. In terms of how you created this narrative, that is absolutely fascinating to me, because I'm a writer. I know how to, write about things, how to imagine them, how to reimagine them, how to put them into words, but how to create images to go with those words. That to me is miraculous, because it's very different from everything else. It's not a movie. It's not, a series of photographs. Interestingly, I love the way you insert photographs among your drawings. How do you illustrate your own written narrative? How does it actually happen? Do you draw first, write first? Does it happen simultaneously, more or less? How does that work?
I've learned a lot on this making this first graphic novel. If I do another one, I would be much more efficient. So in this case, I started because I'm an illustrator and cartoonist, I'm desperate to get drawing. So I wanted to, start sketching, but that's not the way to do it. You need to start with the words.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you do. You need to start with the script, and then the drawing follows. And then at some point they blend, and then it is like a storyboard for a film. I mean, I do say this is like watching a film, because you can read it in about 2 hours if you want. And so at some point you are looking very closely at how the two come together, and then you look at how you can clear out all the words and just make a drawing. So what the illustrations can do, I think sometimes is more powerful than words. A close-up of my mother's face in dementia would take quite a good writer could describe that, but there's something about that punch of just seeing that expression on her face is very powerful.
But it doesn't feel, as I read it didn't feel like you were as if you were illustrating your words. The words were there in their own right. The words, this is the mystery to me, because I've read other graphic novels, and I have the feeling that each graphic novelist does it in their own way. They don't follow the same method, as it were. I mean, you have your own. So what's going on in your brain when you have this idea, this scene, that scene, this part of the story? How does the visual part of your brain talk to the writing part of your brain?
I think for many reasons, but I think one, I'm a cartoonist, so my skill is being very brief with words, and the visual is as important as that little bubble that tells you the gag. So I have honed that skill very well. And then when you do a graphic novel, because it is a story, but it's illustrated, you have to, when you're reading a novel, you have feelings, some scene, you've read a paragraph, and you kind of imagine that in your mind. And I think that's also how it works. So when a scene comes up, you see it, you feel it. And it's much more, I really, in the many versions of this story, you distill. I realized I was really going for the emotional beats. And that's even the way you turn the page. That's a very important aspect of laying out the book as well.
And you have visually sort of separated chapters by these pages that are all one color with maybe one little illustration at the bottom of it.
I had to, because I found it, it can be you need a pause. You need to pause. You need to kind of consider what you've just taken in. And there's a natural moment where you think, okay, this story, I was going to do it just day by day, and I realized I don't really have to. I can create a pause with this almost blank page.
So that's what I loved about your book. I felt the freedom that you had sort of given yourself to do it just the way you want to, just the way it feels right to you creatively. And you did that. And that's why every page, every bit of the page, because each page has so much going on in it, is so surprising, full of surprises. You say you can read it in 2 hours. Yes, you can. And I probably did, because I couldn't put it down. But it really holds your attention because the story is so rich and there's so much going on there. It's almost like, if I can compare it to anything, I would say it's like watching a movie where there's something happening in the foreground, but if you miss what's also happening on the periphery of that scene, you're missing something very important, to understand the whole thing together. So this is it's absolutely delicious to really have those pages to kind of spend time with and to enjoy, this face, that face, this little joke, and the constant, I really would say constant self-irony that you bring into this. You're always laughing at yourself in the saddest moments. You always see yourself as someone who can bring humor to that situation, and you really do. So I think this is what readers can really, enjoy so much in this book. I wanted to ask you about a couple of scenes in the book. Yeah. So we're going to describe them because this is a conversation. So, for example, here you're in the basement. And this perspective where you are at the bottom and at the kind of end of this world that's outside, that's your mother's house, that was the family house, but there's no one here now but yourself. The visual thing here is fantastic. How does that happen artistically in your brain?
My brain. I think so. Thank God I went through the house and photographed as much as I could. That was helpful. So I had these references that I could look at. And that's literally what the walk down to my basement looked like. And I think that, that probably went through many iterations as well. I probably didn't have that dark, smoky, charcoaly gray the first time round. That sort of develops over time as you keep working on the images. Often things don't come, the first pass.
But this is interesting because this reminds me of this kind of shadow on the walls, the sort of, I don't know how you would describe it correctly, but it kind of reminds me of the technique with which you drew the death figure. Yeah,
so I work digitally. I work on an iPad Pro, and so everything is, there's many, many brushes and pencils you can use. And so it's possible that I used, because death was done in this sort of way, using this tool, a charcoal, I probably, maybe even unconsciously, it's interesting you point that out, probably unconsciously used that to kind of have elicit the same feeling that it's quite a scary, dark place down there.
Yes, definitely. This is a place of fear, and you're there alone, and you're very brave for being there.
Yeah, going to do my laundry.
Okay, and then please talk to me about the doctor with the Ben Stiller face.
Yeah.
Well, you actually
Ben
used the
Stiller.
photograph.
I hope he's
Ben
okay with
Stiller.
me. I haven't got clearance from him, but I'm hoping he's all right with it. That was actually true in real life. This young doctor came in and he looked exactly like Ben Stiller.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I couldn't take him seriously. And he did literally spend 3 minutes with my mother and was obsessed with me being from England. And the running gag of the Queen, that when I speak, sometimes people see me as the Queen because I have the smallest little accent that's maybe slightly nudging towards, British. I mean, not really. But when I go to America, I'm seen as, a foreigner. So Ben Stiller was just a way of bringing, some
How did you
humor to that.
think of the photograph as a device in that situation? Because I think it was brilliant. Suddenly, you don't expect that at all, and then suddenly there is an actual Ben Stiller face.
I mean, I'm glad you like that, because it was a risk, I think, because I'd already inserted vintage postcards. I'd left a fully drawn, by me piece of work. So that freed me a bit, and I just thought it would just be funny. I couldn't ever draw, well, he's a man, so I couldn't ever draw Ben Stiller to look like Ben Stiller. So why not be literal? I tried to not be tied to any, there aren't really any rules in graphic novels, but I definitely didn't want to do it in a traditional way with boxes and, that kind of, not Marvel comic, but, that sort of look. I wanted to break out of that, and so the novel, the look of it is, I think, quite unique.